All right, class. So, looking at cartilaginous joint, and in this case, we know that bones are attached by a piece of cartilage. There is no joint cavity. Two specific types in chondrosis, where we have a piece of hyaline cartilage between articulating bones. Classic example is your growth plate or epiphyseal plate, as we see here. This is hyaline cartilage sandwiched between the diaphysis or the shaft and the epiphysis. So, classic example of synchondrosis. Then we have another example is costochondral joints, which are the joints between the ribs. So these are the ribs and these are the costal cartilages. So this joint right here, these are synchondrosis. So the take-home message here, in case of synchondrosis, there is a piece of hyaline cartilage between articulating bones. And functionally, there is no movement in these joints, and therefore these are synarthrosis functionally. Moving on to symphysis, we have a piece of fibrocartilage between articulating bones, and symphysis is present in areas that are subject to a lot of compressional forces and stress. Classic example, pubic symphysis right here. Remember, pubic symphysis is slightly movable in females as compared to males. That is why it's amphiarthrosis, because it allows slight movement. Another example of symphysis is intervertebral discs, which are these that we find in between our vertebrae. Good? All right. Looking at the anatomy of a synovial joint, we do see a picture of the synovial joint on the left hand side. So if you look at a synovial joint, these are the bones, right? We have a bone here and a bone here. And the articular side of the bone is surrounded by the articular cartilage, which is this blue one right here. This is the articular cartilage. Then supporting the joint, we have this articular capsule. Do you see this? This is the articular capsule on either side. And then if I change color, let me change color. Oops. In orange, or now in blue actually, this is the synovial membrane that produces synovial fluid. Okay, so we have articular cartilage, articular capsule, and synovial membrane. We also see the joint cavity, which remains filled with synovial fluid. And the synovial fluid, if you remember, is secreted by the synovial membrane. So the synovial membrane secretes the synovial fluid. Also, there are ligaments that support the joint by holding the bones together and resisting excess or abnormal joint motions. Good, there are blood vessels and nerves associated with the synovial joint as well. All right. Now, additional structures that help maintain the synovial joints are, the first one is bursae. Bursae is a fluid-filled sac that serves to prevent friction between skin, muscles, or tendons and an underlying bone. 3 major bursae and a fat pad are part of a complex joint that unites the femur and the tibia of the leg. Therefore, we are specifically looking at the knee joint here in the picture. And in this, do you see the gray things? Now I'm marking them with blue. These are called bursae. Now these are sac-like structures. They are like sacs filled with synovial fluid, and they are structures that help to prevent friction. Now, looking at types of synovial joints, we already discussed the different types of synovial joints, the type of movements and examples in a previous slide where I wrote things down. Now we will look at the at the diagram here on the right hand side. So if you look here, this is a plain joint. And a plain joint is found between the tarsal bones and also carpals. I want you to know that. It's found between tarsals and carpals. And it allows limited gliding movements. That's a plain joint. The next one, the next one is hinge that we talked about. This is hinge. And your elbow joint, so elbow and knee, classic examples of hinge joint. So it really works like a door hinge. Remember, this is uniaxial movement. Sorry, my handwriting. This is also uniaxial movement. The third one is pivot. Change color. Let's make purple. Is pivot. And a pivot joint allows rotation around an axis, such as between the first and second cervical vertebrae, as we talked about. Classic example is here, between the first and second cervical vertebrae, and things move in an axis. There is rotation around an axis. Okay, and this joint, remember, it is because of this pivot joint that we can move our head side to side. The fourth one is condylar. So let me change color again. The fourth one is condylar, and which is present here. That's condylar. And classic example are your knuckles. Radiocarpal joints. These are your knuckles. The fifth one is saddle, which is right here. Again, change color. Okay, saddle, which is right here. And classic example is a joint between carpal and first metacarpal. So the first carpal metacarpal joint is an example of saddle. Remember one thing, both condylar and saddle, both of them are biaxial. So this is biaxial, meaning there is movement biaxial. There is movement in two directions, as you can see, front and back, side to side, front and back, side to side. The last one is ball and socket, our favorite one. Oops, what am I doing? Ball and socket, which is right here. This is multi-axial, meaning there is movement in multiple axes. Classic example, your hip and shoulder. These are ball and socket joints. Hopefully this is clear. Moving on to some specific joints now. I will not spend too much time talking about these because we will talk more about these joints in our lecture, in our lab PowerPoint. The first one is glenohumeral joint, which is a fancy term for shoulder joint. It's a ball and socket joint, as we see, and it provides widest range of motion. Remember, this is a very, very unstable joint. It has a loose articular capsule and is supported by ligaments and rotator cuff muscles. Again, we will talk about glenohumeral joint in depth in our lab PowerPoint. So this is the diagram or the picture of glenohumeral joint. We have so many things labeled here which can intimidate you, but for now just know that this bone is the humerus, and we see the head of the humerus here. We see the clavicle, we see the scapula, And these are the 3 bones that make up the glenohumeral joint. Again, more to be discussed in lab PowerPoint. The next joint is elbow joint, which is essentially a hinge joint and allows for flexion and extension of the forearm. Flex and extend your forearm and see how the elbow joint works. It is supported by radial and ulnar collateral ligaments. So we have ulnar collateral ligaments here. And on the other side, we have radial collateral ligaments. So on the lateral view, you see the radial collateral ligaments. On the medial view, you see the ulnar collateral ligaments. And then there is another ligament called annular ligament, which is right here. This one is annular ligament, which supports the head of the radius and the proximal radio-ulnar joint, which is a pivot joint that allows for rotation of the radius. So that's elbow joint. So the key points to remember: it's a hinge joint, allows flexion and extension of the forearm. It is supported by radial and ulnar collateral ligaments and also annular ligaments. So these are the key points that you have to remember for testing purpose. Moving on to the hip joint. It's a ball and socket joint. The head of the femur gets into the head of the femur articulates with the acetabulum and it forms a multi-axial joint. This joint provides stability, but also it allows a wide range of motion. When standing, the supporting ligaments are tight, pulling the head of the femur into the acetabulum. So here, for the hip joint, we see the hip bone here. This bone is femur, and this is the head of the femur. We do see that the head of the femur articulates in the acetabulum, and there are 3 ligaments that we need to know when talking about the hip joint. The first ligament is called iliofemoral ligament, and this connects the ilium to the femur. So ilium to femur is iliofemoral ligament. Then we have pubofemoral ligament, which runs from the pubis to femur. And we have the ischiofemoral ligament, which runs from the ischium to femur. Okay, this is ISC. So 3 ligaments associated with the hip joint: iliofemoral, ischiofemoral, and pubofemoral. These 3 you need to know for testing purpose. Looking at the knee joint, it's the largest joint of the body. There are collateral ligaments, there are cruciate ligaments, and there are meniscus that support the knee joint. We will talk about the knee joint in depth in our lab PowerPoint. A video talking about the knee joint and the shoulder joint will be uploaded in your lab PowerPoint section. Okay, so please follow that for both lab and lecture exams. Now, if there is injury to the knee joint, specifically if we have a strong blow to the lateral side of an extended knee, this will actually cause 3 injuries. There will be tearing of the tibial collateral ligament, which is this ligament that connects the tibia to the femur. And there will be damage of the medial meniscus. This is the medial meniscus that will be damaged. And there is another ligament called anterior cruciate ligament here, which will be ruptured. So this one will be torn. There will be damage to this one, and then the anterior cruciate ligament will be ruptured as well. The end